Good morning, folks. Welcome to the IJIS webinar on CJIS security policies. My name is Maria Cardiellos. I'm the Executive Director of the IJIS Institute. I want to thank you for joining us today. I know that the interest in this particular topic is very, very high. It's very, very relevant to many of our mission areas, both on the public and the private sector side. And it's our intention today to speak to some of the recent updates and to provide you sort of a view forward of what the path will be for additional updates in the future and how we want to help communicate those to you. Today, I'm joined for the short term and for what is, I guess, the next hour and a half by Charlie Schaefer, who's responsible for the safety and justice strategy for Microsoft, and Chris Weatherly, who is from, of course, FBI CJIS and is the Information Security Officer. Both of these gentlemen have a long history and career in supporting the justice and public safety domain, and both come to you offering you information on what is the new events that are happening within the domain and how it will best serve you to be aware of those. Given the high popularity and the registration for this event, we think that we're in the 500 to 600 range. I'm going to provide you a brief overview of the IJIS Institute solely for the purpose of understanding who we are and why we're even bringing this community together. I've kept it deliberately high level. I wanted to keep it informal. It's hard to be informal with 3 people on the virtual stage and 600 people in the audience. But if you give me just a second, I'm going to show you some slides. And here we are. Hopefully you will see what is an introductory slide. Hang on, let's make sure that I've got this right. I'm going to try something a little different and make sure that I am on slide number 1 for you. Makes it a little bit easier. Okay. Are you seeing any slides now? Chris and Charlie, you seeing slides?
Yes, see them.
Wonderful. Okay. All right. So the IJIS Institute is a private nonprofit that has been in existence for about 22 years. It is an organization that was seeded and founded by the Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Assistance. And the original intention was to foster a better working relationship and a better communication path between public sector practitioners, primarily in the justice space, and private sector service providers or vendors, classically the RMS providers, the CAD providers, et cetera. 22 years later, we have far superseded what was that original goal. We are a collaboration network that speaks to a membership on the private sector side, the public sector side, the practitioner levels on the federal, state, county, local levels, academics, researchers, federal policymakers. The list is extremely long. It is rich with talent and it is rich with tentacles in many different facets of the justice world. Any of us that were participating in what was the response to 9/11 knows that the definition of justice practitioners, of responders in general, coupled with the instantaneous availability of data on any one of our devices, the world is much smaller. So the ability and the need to have data has far superseded what was the original intent of the classic justice partners 22 years ago. And those are represented in that practitioner and membership base. Our goal is to support what are their individual and collective operational mission goals, and of course, to support what is safety, efficiency, and productivity within their communities. To the extent that we are an organization that brings methodology, framework, and consistency to our solutions, we are not a developer of any sort. We don't sell tools. We bring together those practitioners and providers, and we do so by advocating for policies, processes, and information sharing standards. What that means basically is that all of the policies that some that we're going to be speaking directly to today, those policies on the federal, state, county, local levels that sometimes are harmonious and sometimes even conflict with one another are ones that need to be aligned, and the practitioner and providers need to be aware of those in order to support the outcomes. The processes, of course, looks for consistencies, and the standards look for what are those tools and enablements that will better share and better advocate for what is interoperability of solutions or data sharing, et cetera. Without getting into any particular details, that 22-year history changed each time, given the skill sets that were challenged based upon the event that happened in the world. So 9/11 corresponded to when we started. It actually was after we were formulated. But the Katrinas of the world, the natural disasters, the man-made disasters, the violence that we see in our communities, in our schools, the pandemic, all are examples of events that once again challenged the services and the events that we needed to support in order to collectively enhance the operational outcomes of our mission partners. Just to understand how the justice community has expanded over the years because of those events, you see the domains that we service. And again, I don't want to spend too much time on this because there's more important information to chat about. I will, however, spend just a moment on how we are formulated and how we are organized. Within what are the classic justice space practitioners, we have what are 7 standing committees. We have what are the CJIS Advisory Committee, a law enforcement advisory committee that corresponds to the public safety and primarily the safety practitioner on the federal and state and local levels consecutively. We have a courts and corrections advisory committee. And again, they service those particular domains. And the intention is to bring public and private together in order to not only identify what are the priorities in the field, but most importantly, how to collectively respond to those priorities in the field. They are not given a dictate by what are either the board of directors of our organization nor by the home office. These are driven priorities from the field that have to be responded to, and then we collectively support them. Emergency communications and data analytics was actually 2 recent, I say recent committees as in maybe a year old or a year and a half, based upon what were critical events happening. So interestingly enough, during the pandemic and at the beginning of it, but not because of it, emergency communications was one of those committees that we stood up. And because of the mirror dynamic that everyone had to be remote, that was one more priority and area of assistance that the collective bodies needed to respond to. Data analytics, or cross-domain data sharing, as we sometimes refer to it, is just that. The broader the scope of data that is available that we securely transfer from one domain to the other, the more need there is and the more desire there are from the practitioners in order to be able to slice and dice that information for their unique purposes. And of course, information technology is that fundamental committee that then crosses the boundaries of each of these domain committees that then speak to what are the efficiencies or the emerging technologies or the new technologies that, again, will be spoken to directly today as it relates to the environment for CJIS data. We provide many services and events, and I would just suggest that anyone that's interested in understanding more about IJIS not only communicate with us directly, because we're really much more communicative than what is the Zoom format, but you just visit our website and certainly feel free to reach out with any questions. Again, more to the heart of today's event. CJIS security policies are what drive many of your unique either operational missions, the development of your software tools or applications, or the path that will be directly affected because of these policy releases. Today's event was so of import and such interest was driven that we've actually scheduled what is a second one because we were high on the numbers and we wanted to ensure that there was no concerns with delivery of this information. So on January 12th, we will be delivering another event speaking to this particular version, 5.9.1, which then, of course, focuses on security, media protection, screening, and data encryption. You'll see that for the spring and the summer and fall of 23, we are working directly with Chris and CJIS representatives on what will be not only the completion of those releases, but then the intended delivery of what are the webinars that then correspond to those, so that again, we bring that information to you so that it comes to you in a package that not only is very informative, but then provides you with information on how to follow up for more information as it is necessary. That is my spiel. That is my offering to you as the opening of this event. I am very grateful for you to participate. I'm going to pass this to Charlie Schaefer, who leads our CJIS security work group, who not only has a rich career of his own, but now is supporting, he's come over to the dark side. And I've been on several sides of the table. So now I get to say, we were both on public sector, I'm on the nonprofit, and Charlie's on the dark side, but it's all good because we've all been there. And frankly, that is the reason why we know that this is a very broad community that is working collectively to support operational missions. So Charlie, I'm going to pass the gauntlet to you. I'm going to put myself on mute, but I will stand with you for a little while and then return for what is the presentation and any questions in the future.
Great, thank you, Maria. And it's a good thing I'm wearing my black shirt today since I'm on the dark side.
Yeah, there you go.
But yes, I'm Charlie, and I am responsible for public safety and justice strategy for Microsoft. And I was the former CJIS systems officer and compact officer for the great state of Florida. But as Maria said, I'm speaking to you today as the chairman of the IJIS Institute's Security Policy Work Group. This work group, along with the ICP task force under the LEIT section that is chaired by Jim Emerson, is assessing the impact of the current and upcoming revisions to the CJIS SecPol and coordinating educational and informational campaigns to support industry and practitioners. And I looked at the list, and we have a good mix of both industry and practitioners on the call today. Essentially, we know that these changes impact all of us in this community, both criminal justice vendors and agencies alike. And we want to ensure that we have a common understanding of the revisions and come up with strategies on how to secure our nation's criminal justice information. That's really the goal, is understanding what we need to do to protect the data. Today's webinar is the first iteration of these campaigns. And as Maria outlined, we're going to have more of these, but we're not limiting it to webinars alone. We're going to also come out with other material that can help you along the way. So my ask of you today is to help me help you. Let me know if this webinar was helpful and what questions that you still have after the webinar, so we can improve our educational campaigns and we can do better as we move along through the next year, as we see these revisions come out, and provide the information that you need. It doesn't do us any good to have these webinars with 700 people on them and then realize that we missed the mark. So please help me help you. Send me the questions. We can come up with a frequently asked question page, and we can get those answers back out to you that if we miss the mark. So without further ado, it is my privilege to introduce to you the FBI CJIS Information Security Officer, Chris Weatherly. Take it away, Chris. Play a guitar for us.
Thank you very much, Charlie. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you to IJIS for having me today and sponsoring this webinar. I want to make sure that you guys can see the screen, the presentation that I'll be sharing here. If I could just get some acknowledgement there that you can see the screen.
Yes, sir.
You can see it.
We can see it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So my name is Chris Weatherly. I'm the FBI CJIS Information Security Officer, for those who don't know me. It is my job to foster the CJIS security policy and be the liaison between the FBI CJIS division and the CJIS, the liaison between the FBI CJIS division and the CJIS APB. As we build this, as Charlie was saying, to protect our criminal justice information from our adversaries. This is the CJIS division. We are located in north central West Virginia on roughly about 986 acres. We have multiple buildings, but in 1995 actually is when we opened the CJIS main facility, and in 2015 the Biometric Technology Center. It is actually the world's biometric technology center. We are in coordination with the Department of Defense, and it is the premier technology center for biometrics. I want to read the mission of the CJIS division verbatim. I usually don't read the slides verbatim, but I want to read this one. The mission of the CJIS division is to equip our law enforcement, national security, and intelligence community partners with the criminal justice information they need to protect the United States while protecting civil liberties. As Charlie said, this is about criminal justice information, and not just criminal justice agencies use criminal justice information. Our non-criminal justice partners are also using this information to make adjudicative decisions on people who are going to have access to our vulnerable populations, our young, our elderly, those that are participating in recreation sports. This information is used for that to make those adjudicative decisions as well. I like to distill this slide down to getting the right information to the right person at the right time. And that is what the CJIS Security Policy does. It enables our systems to make sure that we're getting the right information, that information is the integrity has not been lost to that information, to the right person, the confidentiality, make sure we're maintaining that confidentiality. And then lastly, at the right time, that availability, making sure that information is available when those people need this information to make those adjudicative decisions. Now, a little overview of the CJIS Security Policy. It applies to everyone who is processing criminal justice information, and criminal justice information is defined as FBI CJIS provided information. If you have a records management system or something along that line within your local agency that doesn't have any FBI CJIS provided information, it just has your local data. Perhaps it just has your state data. The CJIS Security Policy may not apply to it. It does require some sort of protections, but maybe it's not the CJIS Security Policy. So whenever you start to think, does the CJIS Security Policy apply to me? If you have FBI CJIS provided information, that is information that has come from the FBI CJIS division, the CJIS Security Policy does apply to you and that data. The second bullet there, the shared management philosophy. I get this a lot. Well, the FBI said it had to be this way. Chris Weatherly said it had to be this way. No, we do not do this in a vacuum. We work with the FBI CJIS APB, the Advisory Policy Board, to create this CJIS Security Policy. So it is a shared management philosophy. And these are the standards, the information security requirements that the APB has deemed necessary to protect the confidentiality, the integrity, the availability of our criminal justice information. As I just said a minute ago, information security requirements. This is the minimum set. You can go above and beyond the CJIS Security Policy, but you cannot go below the requirements in the CJIS Security Policy if you're going to be processing criminal justice information, which again is FBI CJIS provided information. The CJIS Security Policy, it is rooted in the Federal Information System Management Now Modernization Act, and that to that point, it includes presidential directives, federal laws, and FBI directives, but it is tailored by the CJIS APB process. Through this process, where we take it in front of all the CJIS systems officers from across the nation, local representatives who are chosen by the National Sheriff's Association or the International Association of Chiefs of Police, we put these topics in front of these working groups to make sure that we hear how these topics are going to benefit or have perhaps prohibit state and local criminal justice agencies. We take them in front of the compact regional committees as well to make sure that we're not, that they won't have a negative impact on the people, the non-criminal justice agencies who are using this information. Then we take it to subject matter experts. In my case, it would be through the Security Access Subcommittee, and then eventually to the CJIS APB every June and December. And the APB will make that recommendation, their recommendation based on the arguments or the policies, the papers that they've heard up until this point, make that recommendation to the FBI director. And then the FBI director will grant the final approval, which will allow me to put it into the CJIS Security Policy and publish that. We are modernizing the CJIS security policy, and it was time. And the reason I say it was time, the first version of the CJIS security policy I have is dated like August 2000. And it was literally NCIC requirements. NCIC started back in 1967, and they had security requirements. And the CJIS security policy in August of 2000 was merely just, a repeat of those. In February 2011, the FBI CJIS ISO, George White at the time, rewrote the CJIS security policy. He wrote version 5.0. And through a modernization effort at that time, it took a while to get the CJIS security policy modernized then. But he did publish in 2011 version 5.0, which was a major modernization from the previous versions of the CJIS security policy. And over the last 9 years, well, now been 11, we have had 9 iterations to the CJIS security policy, or during that time we had 9 iterations. But in June of 2019, I put forward through conversations with CJIS systems officers across the nation, there was a request to modernize the CJIS security policy. So in June of 2019, I put in front of the CJIS APB the recommendation to modernize the CJIS, the CJIS security policy, because technology had outpaced the CJIS security policy. We were way out of date with our CJIS security requirements or information assurance requirements for the technology that was out there at the time. It was the APB recommended that, and therefore we put it forward to the director for his approval. But there were some competing priorities, and in January of 2020, we stood up an interpretive guidance task force, and this task force was focused on solely state and local workloads being transitioned to the cloud, and how much of Section 5.12 personnel security applied to that. Now, I don't want to steal any thunder because we're going to get into that section here in a little bit, but that's what that interpretive guidance task force was tasked to do by the APB. During the 2020, of course, we had the pandemic, and in September of 2020, I was finally able to pull together a modernization kickoff. And in October, the first thing you do when you're looking to see, when you're investigating, what security requirements do I need to put around my data? I have to understand that data. What is the impact to the what is the impact to the loss of confidentiality or integrity or availability? Those 3 things I mentioned earlier. Is it a high impact? Is it a moderate impact? Is it a low impact? In around the 1st of June, around the 1st of 2021, a data categorization task force recommended to the APB that criminal justice information should be considered a moderate, and that's a moderate impact to the loss of confidentiality, a loss of impact, a loss of integrity, or a loss of availability. So in June of 2021, you can see that the CJIS APB did recommend that moderate categorization to the FBI director. It was accepted. The FBI director did accept that. Was kind of working at risk during this time frame, because I had already started looking at some of the smaller information assurance controls with a task force to say, okay, we believe it's going to go this way. We believe it's going to be a moderate impact. So let's start working through this process so that we can do it at an accelerated pace when we finally get the green light. And between June and December, the director did accept and approve that recommendation from the APB that criminal justice information be categorized as a moderate impact. And from that point forward, in December of 2021, we put together the media protection modernization. And that was done by a security control task force at that moderate level. And we put these forward in front of the CJIS APB in December of 2021, and they recommended that as well. They also, in December of 2021, the APB recommended the IGTF changes. The IGTF, the Interpretive Guidance Task Force that I spoke about earlier, that started in January of 2020. They also recommended the changes that were recommended by that group as well. Again, we'll get into those in a few slides here. So let's look at the CJIS security policy and some of the changes that we've had. In 2020, we did publish version 5.9. In 5.9, there was a clarification made to the responsible party for the mobile device manager, and this was back in section 513.2. Mobile device manager, of course, is something that looks over our mobile devices, those limited featured operating systems, things that do not have the ability to have firewalls or antivirus on them, tablets, phones, things like that. How do we control those? You use a mobile device manager to control those items. Should they become lost, you can brick it, make it non-operational. But there was a question that was put forward by the community of who's responsible for making sure that mobile device manager is on that limited featured operating system. And through the APB deliberations, it was decided that the agency that owns the device was actually the one responsible for ensuring the mobile device manager was employed or deployed on those devices. Also in version 5.9, we made a change to Appendix H, which is a security addendum. If a criminal justice agency is using a contractor, a private contractor, to assist them in the administration of criminal justice, they're going to contract that out. In that contract, the CJIS security policy must be mentioned. Also in that contract, the security addendum, which is in Appendix H, must be a part of that contract. At the end of that security addendum, there's a certificate page, which each employee of that private contractor who's going to have unescorted access to unencrypted criminal justice information must certify that they understand they've received a CJIS security policy. They understand that they're held to the CJIS security policy, that they must abide by that CJIS security policy to protect the criminal justice information. I think back in 2014, there was an example form that made that bridge between the contract and the security addendum. And for some reason, before I took this office, it was removed, but the community wanted it back. So now it exists back in Appendix H of that example form to append that addendum to the contract. And then finally, in our advanced authentication decision tree in 56222, we had a decision tree. Is the access coming from a physically secure location? Is it coming from a non-physically secure locations? It was a decision tree. It's still within the policy. At that time, it was still within the policy. I'll explain that in a second. But we had to update the description because there were some inaccuracies in that. So we took that time to correct those inaccuracies. And then came along version 5.9.1, and it looked at media protection, the change to media protection. It was a complete section replacement. All the current requirements that were in 5.9 were brought over to 5.9.1. They were reformatted. They were aligned with NIST 853. There were 3 new requirements. When I told you a minute ago, I was working at risk on that moderate impact. I started with a small control family, media protection. It has 7 requirements in totality. And I told the team as we were getting into it, I want to fail fast. I want to fail. I want to fall down. I want to fail fast. I want to see what's going to cause us heartburn. What are our obstacles to get it, to overcome? What are our hurdles? What do we need to knock down so that when we get this team up to a performing standard, we'll be ready to perform, right? When we get into those bigger information assurance requirements, we'll be better equipped and we'll learn from our mistakes. So media protection, seven total requirements, only 3 new requirements. Those new requirements are MP1C, which talks about reviewing and updating the policies and procedures. We also have media marking, MP3, and then media use, which is in MP7. So let's dive a little deeper into this media protection policy. These are the changes that are published in 5.9.1. Every security control family and the new modernized CJIS security policy will have policies and procedures. It's the MP. It's the number. I don't want to say number 1 control, but I'll say the first control in each security control family. MP1, IA1, AT1. It's all about policies and procedures. As we go through this, you'll see words that are black, words that are in red. Some of the statements will be highlighted. Those words that are in black come directly from NIST 853 revision 5.1. If you'll recall a few slides ago, I said the APB has the ability to tailor these security requirements. The words that are written in red is where the APB took the liberty of tailoring those requirements to make it meet our community. So as we'll see in MP1A, develop, document, and disseminate to authorized individuals, this agency level media protection policy that addresses those things. It talks about purpose, its scope and roles, responsibilities, management, commitment, these things. It's consistent with applicable laws, executive orders, directives, and all that. And then we'll also develop, document, and disseminate to authorized individuals procedures to facilitate the implementation of that media protection policy. In B, we see that we're designating, and again, here's a tailoring opportunity, an individual with security responsibilities. Historically, the CJIS Security Policy spoke to the criminal justice agency community. The compact officer of the FBI, who works with the, primarily with the non-criminal justice community, challenged me and said, make it about the data. Don't direct it to certain individuals. And historically, like I would say, this would say designate a LASSO or a local agency security officer to manage the development, documentation, and dissemination of this media protection policy. On the non-criminal justice side, there is no such thing as a local agency security officer. There's an authorized recipient security officer, or ARSO. So we had to find that common ground. So we designated an individual with security responsibilities. And you'll see this throughout the policy. It's all about the data and individuals who have certain responsibilities. Continuing on with MP1, as you'll see, this is highlighted, meaning this is a new requirement. We are going to review and update those current media protection policies at least annually, and following any security incidents involving digital or non-digital media. We're also going to review and update the procedures at least annually, and following any security incidents involving digital or non-digital media. As we get into MP2, we talk about restricting access to digital and non-digital media to authorized individuals. Some of these, some of you may be looking at these information assurance requirements and saying, well, of course, that just makes sense, right? Yeah, but we're going to put this in, that's just part of the policy, restrict access to digital and non-digital media to those authorized individuals. A new control that we see here at the bottom, MP3, media marking. Mark system media indicating the distribution limitations, handling caveats, and applicable security markings, if any, of the information. And B, exempt digital and non-digital media containing criminal justice information, or CJI, from that marking if the media remain within physically secure locations and controlled areas, both defined within the CJIS Security Policy. This is a new requirement. We're going to be following an executive order that was published back in 2010 that speaks to controlled unclassified information. There is specific markings that we'll have to have on our criminal history record information, or CJI, and to be in compliance with that executive order. I am working with FBI CJIS resources to make sure that to try to help agencies meet this requirement, that if you print out something from IJIS, III, NCIC, Index, NICS, any, name any system, that it will already have these banner markings, these headings on it, if you will, so that it's already marked appropriately and will help agencies meet this requirement. Not a new control, MP4, media storage, physically control and secure digital and non-digital media within these physically secure locations or controlled areas. The difference being, if you don't have the ability to have a physically secure location, signage, card readers, the ability to control access in and out. You can have a controlled area, which is just a smaller office, kind of like the office I'm in here, just a smaller place where you can make sure that criminal justice information is locked up, but you're controlling access to it. It is a controlled area. And then encrypting that criminal justice information on those digital media when the physical and personnel restrictions are not feasible. Again, the red markings here were all the ability to tailor these requirements based on the APB. B tells us to protect the system media types that are defined in MP4A above until the media is destroyed or sanitized using approved equipment, techniques, and procedures. Getting into media transport, again, not a new requirement. Protect and control the digital, non-digital media to help prevent compromise of the data when it's transported outside the physically secure location. Where you find the definitions of those physically secure locations is in section 5.9 of the CJIS Security Policy. Or if you're using encryption, you can find that in the section 5.10.1.2 of the CJIS Security Policy. Now, physical media is going to be protected at the same level of information as it would be if it was in electronic format. We're going to restrict the activities associated with the transport and electronic and physical media to those authorized personnel. Maintain the accountability for system media during transport outside of the physically secure locations or controlled areas. And the way you'll do that is through documenting those activities documenting the activities associated with the transport and restricting the activities associated with the transport to, again, authorized personnel. When we get into media sanitization, let's say you're done with this piece of media, you no longer need it. You're going to release this hard drive outside of agency control. So we want to either sanitize or destroy that digital and non-digital media prior to its disposal, prior to it being released out of agency controls, or if it's released for another reason within your agency and it had criminal justice information, but you're going to use it for something now that doesn't require criminal justice information. The way you'll do that is you'll either overwrite the technology at least 3 times. You can degauss it, the digital media, prior to disposal or release. If you have inoperable digital media, it'll be destroyed. It'll, shredded of some sort. And then physical media will be securely disposed of when no longer needed for investigative or security purposes, whichever is later, right? CJIS Security Policy reminds us that we must keep our logs for at least 1 year. If something were to happen in that year that you would require some sort of security investigation or something along that line, you would want to maintain that physical media that you're talking about. A lot of people, a lot of criminal justice agencies, and maybe some non-crims, I don't know, if they have a hard drive that is no longer going to be used, they take it to the range and shoot it full of holes. That is definitely one way to destroy the platters within a hard drive. B tells us that we're going to employ sanitization mechanisms with the strength and integrity commensurate with the security category or classification of the information. This is controlled unclassified information. The sanitization methods are mentioned up in A there. When it says overwrite technology at least 3 times, what we're looking for is that you're going to overwrite that technology with a character, which is usually all ones, as we know is in technology. It's either a 0 or 1. So we're going to write a character, usually it's all ones. Its complement is the way it's written, and that to be the 0, and then random. So we'll write 1s and 0s throughout that, and that is the 3 times overwrite that we're looking for. Or as it says, you can degauss it, which means slapping a big magnet against it, and it is forever sanitized. Moving on into media use. These are new controls, as you can see. Restrict the use of digital and non-digital media on agency-owned systems that have been approved for the use in storage, processing, transmission of criminal justice information by using these technical, physical, and administrative controls, and we list examples below. We want to prohibit the use of personally owned digital media devices on all agency-owned or controlled systems that process, transmit CJI. So we don't want someone bringing in their own thumb drive and plugging it into one of our systems. Their iPhone, they don't want them charging their iPhone because that will initiate some data transfer or give the ability for data transfer back and forth. And then lastly, in C there, it talks about prohibiting the use of digital media devices on all agency-owned or controlled systems that are processing criminal justice information when the devices have no identifiable owner. Meaning, if you find one of your employees, or you find a thumb drive in the parking lot, don't bring it into our agency-owned or controlled devices and plug it in. Right, it's a great way to drop some malware on an agency's information systems. The thumb drive that was found in the parking lot, well, let's plug it in, see who it belongs to. We want to prohibit the use of that. And the way that we do these things, there's technical controls that we can do that. We can either do it through port disabling, access control lists, security groups, group policy objects, mobile device managers, physical control. We have a lock server, we have cages, disconnect the CD-ROM drive in the PC, or even remove the USB port. And then through administrative controls, the agency's electronic media policy that we talked about in MP1, defining how flash drives are to be used within the agency's rules of behavior, etc. So that is like I said, there were only 7 controls within MP, within the media protection. So now I'm going to get into some more of the 5.9.1 changes and talk about the Interpretive Guidance Task Force. Now, as I said, back in the end of 2000, well, about the middle of 2019, agencies were starting to really look into cloud services. I want to move my CJIS workload up into a cloud service. Well, what does that mean? What is a cloud, right? Do I need to? Do I still need to meet the CJIS security policy if I go into the cloud? The answer is yes, absolutely, right? What pieces of the policy apply? Do I need to do certain things? What about the personnel security requirements for the cloud service providers back in 5.12? Do they have unescorted access to unencrypted CJI? If so, then absolutely, that will apply. So this Interpretive Guidance Task Force spent an exhaustive 18 months deliberating this, investigating this, talking with cloud service, Cloud Security Alliance, talking with NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, Government Services Administration, cloud experts around the nation, and gathering all this information to make this educated and pitch to the APB to say it depends. And that's a great security answer. I love to say that all the time. Somebody will ask me a question, Chris, can I do this? Well, it depends, right? That's the best security answer I can give. But the agency needs to determine what is unescorted access to unencrypted CJI. The agency needs to understand what type of cloud service they are procuring. There are 3. There's information as a service. Infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. You can see them there, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. Infrastructure as a service is that the cloud service provider is going to give you just a playground. Here you go. You can set up shop in our little environment, but you control it. You control everything about it, right? Platform as a service, cloud service provider is going to give you a little more. They're going to give you some software to play around with, and this is where your developers usually hang out, in this area here, trying out these new things. Does this work with our information? Well, let's help us satisfy a functional requirement of our business. And then lastly, software as a service. I've noticed recently that CAD and RMS vendors are now offering software as a service, right? They're not hosting it no more in your criminal justice agency on-prem. It's in the cloud. Well, based on these types of service, different pieces of the CJIS security policy start to apply, right? When it comes to section 5.12, the personnel security requirements, if you have infrastructure as a service and you control everything about that infrastructure, you control the encryption keys, right? The ability for someone to have unescorted access to unencrypted criminal justice information. If you control the environment and the encryption keys, then the cloud service provider doesn't have unescorted access to unencrypted criminal justice information. Therefore, a background check is not necessary for those personnel. Now, as you continue to climb up this stack, when you get into platforms as a service, right? When they start offering software, or definitely when we get into the CAD and RMS vendors who are doing software as a service, there is a increasingly high likely chance that those people are going to have unescorted access to unencrypted criminal justice information. Know what type of service you're procuring. Know what your service level agreement says. Control your encryption keys. If you don't, let's say you're in a CAD and RMS solution that your provider is using software as a service on one of the cloud service providers, do they control the encryption keys? That, in essence, not permitting the cloud service provider to get into their solution, right? As a criminal justice agency or non-criminal justice agency, likely, as I said, that software as a service provider is going to have unescorted access to unencrypted criminal justice information, or at least the likelihood is greatly increased. So you're going to run background checks, through your CJIS systems agency for that. If I say this for the criminal justice side, the non-criminal justice side, you must have a statute that permits you to run those criminal background checks. But make sure that your software as a service provider controls their encryption keys. Therefore, the cloud service personnel who are supporting that software as a service don't have unescorted access to unencrypted CJI, thereby eliminating the need for a background check. G3, the cloud computing appendix, back in the back of the CJIS Security Policy, goes more in depth into this. It gives examples. There's also examples now in 5.12 about defining an infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, and give some use cases. So it helps you make that decision. What kind of cloud service offering am I procuring? Is someone going to have unescorted access to unencrypted criminal justice information? Do I need to control the encryption keys? If I don't, then if the cloud service provider controls your encryption keys, there's a real good chance that they're going to have, again, unescorted access, unencrypted criminal justice information. So control your own encryption keys, eliminate that need to run these background checks. Also in 5.12, we made a change to the opening paragraph. This is the opening paragraph to 5.12, and you can see what the change was. So regardless of the implementation model, physical data center, virtual cloud solution, or a hybrid model, unescorted access to unencrypted criminal justice information must be determined by the agency, taking into consideration if those individuals have unescorted logical or physical access to any information system resulting in the ability, right, or privilege to view, modify, or make use of unencrypted criminal justice information. Boil that down. Do they have unescorted logical access resulting in the ability to view unencrypted criminal justice information? You see, I'm just picking pieces of that to make a sentence. And if it comes down to be that they have unescorted access to unencrypted criminal justice information, then yes, background checks are necessary in accordance with the CJIS Security Policy section 5.12. Also down in 5.12.1, there are some supplemental guidance that speaks about the fingerprint-based records checks may not be required for all cloud provider personnel. Again, depending upon the type of service offering, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, and access to the encryption keys. Control your own encryption keys. Background checks likely go out the window. And then we also added some supplemental guidance about seeing Appendix G3 for guidance on personnel screening requirements specific to those cloud environments. So in 2022, I want to give you a high-level view of what we've taken through the CJIS APB in 2022. In the spring, for the policy modernization, we took through identification and authentication. This looks at our system accounts. This looks at our authentication when we're authenticating those identities. This talks about device identification, talks about identity proofing. One of the, I'll say two of the biggest things that change really within this section is multi-factor authentication. Historically, you only needed to do what was called advanced authentication if you were directly accessing. Now, direct access means the ability to enter some keys on a terminal or a phone and get information back from FBI CJI, right? I only need to do advanced authentication if I was outside a physically secure location and had direct access. If I had indirect access, which means it's just a packet of criminal justice information, or I was within a physically secure location with direct access, I didn't need to do advanced authentication. With actually 5.9.2, which, as we saw on a slide earlier, was published in last week, actually. Multi-factor authentication is required no matter who you are or where you are. So for privileged and non-privileged users, inside a physically secure location, outside a physically secure location, with direct access, with indirect access, it does not matter. Multi-factor authentication is required. If you remember, I said that criminal justice information was categorized as moderate. So that puts us at an identity, I'm sorry, let's speak about authenticator assurance level 2. Within AAL2, there are 9 different types of authenticators. We still have our passwords and PINs, right? That are now called memorized secrets. But with the use of that password or PIN, we need to have authentication from a possession-based, from a possession-based authenticator. All these are defined within the CJIS security policy. It's most important to know which authenticator you're using and focus solely on those requirements. As Maria explained earlier, we're going to have subsequent webinars, and they will focus specifically on these 3 areas that I'm talking about now. We'll go in depth into the identification and authentication and those authenticators that are required. The other thing that's really changed is identity proofing, knowing for certain who is in front of you requesting access to your information system. How do I identity proof someone? Well, if you have a real ID from your DMV, your local DMV or state DMV, when you went to go get that real ID, and it's a real ID because it has the notation of the gold star on top, but you had to supply certain things: your birth certificate, your previous driver's license, a utility bill, credit card statement. You had to prove your identity to be able to get that new driver's license. That is identity proofing, and we're going to require the same thing for access into our information systems that are processing criminal justice information. If you're a LEAP user now, Law Enforcement Enterprise Portal, and from the CJIS division, you may have already been through this. LEAP is actually re-vetting, re-authenticating, re-identity proofing. Allow me to use that word, if you will. All of their users. So it's a monumental task for LEAP because they have roughly 50, 60,000 users that they're having to identity proof. So that's 2 of the biggest changes. There's other changes within INA, of course, but that's 2 of the biggest. Awareness and training. Historically, the CJIS security policy had 4 levels of security awareness training, and it was required every 2 years. The Security Policy Modernization Task Force made a recommendation to the CJIS Security Policy Modernization Task Force, who made a recommendation. Let me show you some bureaucracy here. Made a recommendation to the Security Access Subcommittee, who made a recommendation to the APB, who recommended it to the director, that we have, again, 4 levels of security awareness training, but they are people who have unescorted access to the physically secure location, for people who have logical access to our information systems, for our privileged users, that's the 3rd one, our administrators, things like that, people who make this, keep the system going. And then there will be specialized training for our individuals with security responsibilities, our LASSOs, our ARSOs, again, local agency security officers or authorized recipient security officers. There will be specialized training for that. And likely the biggest change, and this is where, if I'm speaking in front of a live audience and not a webinar, I get a lot of groans, is that, as I was said before, it was required every 2 years. It is now going to be required annually. Every year you have to take this awareness, this security awareness training. Lastly, we get into system and information integrity. This is making sure that you're looking at your file structures and making sure they're not changing unless you change them, right? Having some sort of integrity checking software, watching your file systems, making sure there's nothing is changing there. You don't have an actor within that is making unnecessary changes, or has taken ownership of your system making these changes. One of the other things, biggest thing within the system and information integrity, malicious code, antivirus. This is where your antivirus is. Your spam definitions, patching patch, patch, patch. If you leave this webinar without just remembering one thing, patch your systems. Statistics have shown that if you have multi-factor authentication and you're patching your systems, you can eliminate, in the high 90s, any kind of infiltration into your system. So patch your systems. SI2, which is one of the requirements within System and Information Integrity, will put some timelines on patches. If it's a critical patch, it's got to be on the system within 7 days. If it's a low or a high patch, it has to be on there within 15 days. I'm spitting numbers at you, and I hope they're right. But you have different categories of your vulnerabilities, right? Of the patches that are fixing these vulnerabilities: critical, high, medium, and low. And all of those have timelines of which they must be installed upon the system. Tiering was removed from the requirements companion document 2015-ish. There was a big push to get users on and data into index. And to do that, a lot of people were having trouble getting their systems ready for that. So the APB recommended a tiering. It only had 2 tiers, tier 1 and tier 2. And it said you had to have all the tier 1 requirements installed before we would grant you connectivity. Tier 2 requirements could come later, with an agreement between you and your CSO, CJIS systems officer. It was removed because really it wasn't used, and 95% of the requirements were tier 1, with the remainder being tier 2. So it was pulled back from that. So right now, every requirement within the CJIS Security Policy is required for connectivity. We did have what they call the APB calls a fast track, and it was under System and Services Acquisition, and it's item number 22. And it deals with unsupported software components, hardware and software. If you have, I used to make the joke that if you had, an older Windows version, I think it was Windows XP, if you were still using XP, it was time to move off of that system. And one of my colleagues at Microsoft said, Chris, you can actually stop using that joke because we stopped supporting it back in 2014, but as of last week it turned 21, so it's now legal to drink. But what happens is if you have these unsupported hardware software components, the vendor is going to get tired, or they're just going to stop supporting it, right? They're going to stop patching it. They're going to stop providing you support unless you pay considerable money for that continued support. When they stop supporting those things, the vulnerabilities don't stop. People are still taking advantage. Threat actors are still taking advantage of the vulnerabilities that existed, those unpatched vulnerabilities, and new ones are coming out every day. So our threat actors are taking advantage of our information systems using unsupported system components. So Fast Track SA22 actually speaks about if you no longer have contracted vendor support or manufacturer support, you have to replace that component. We can't have these systems, this hardware and software that are just lagging out there with increasing vulnerabilities and no way to patch them, right? So that's what this one is about. That was in the spring. All right, we took all those through in just a second. We took 3 more topics through the APB and the compact. Access control. This is actually once the identity is authenticated, what can it do once it gets into the system? One of the biggest changes here is AC2 paren 3, which talks about having attributes for each identity. There are 29 attributes listed that was recommended by the APB just last week that each identity needs to have. And these attributes that, they're the sworn law enforcement attribute, EMS personnel, they have intelligence training, certain other things. But these attributes enable that identity once it gets into an information system about what types of information they're allowed to access and what types of information they're restricted from. So that's one of the big things there. Something that you'll have heard of, but is also in access control. AC7 talks about unsuccessful logon attempts. You know, after we fail our authenticator 5 times, the system's going to lock, and it's going to require an administrator to unlock that node before the identity can get back into it. Inactivity timeouts, still going to be 30 minutes. There are some exceptions to that. If the information system is within a police conveyance, a criminal justice conveyance, or within a physical secure location and used, for dispatch, or if it's a receive-only terminal, it will be exempt from that inactivity logout. Another family we took through was incident response. What happens when things go bad? What happens when somebody gets in, right? It talks about the development of an incident response plan. It talks about training these incident response personnel above and beyond the security awareness training that we just spoke of. Having a plan, having a detailed plan. What happens when it goes bad? And trust me, there will be days it will go bad, and you want to be prepared for that. You want to have tabletop exercises. You want to have DR, disaster recovery drills, things like that. And then maintenance was the last topic that we took through in the fall of this year. And when you talk about maintenance, think about our peripherals, our copiers, our scanners, our things like that. When somebody's coming in to work on those, what are they using? What are they using to plug into that system? You know, is it virus free? Does it have anything on it? You know, keeping a comprehensive inventory of your printers, your copiers, your scanners, your faxes, knowing, you know, that this serial number exists and this hard drive exists and within this printer, this copier or something like that, so that if something is swapped out, you're aware of it. You know something has changed. And because you kept a log of who came in and what devices they were using to check that, you know exactly how to start tracing that, right? How to start coming to the end, or coming to understand what was changed and who changed it and how it happened, so that we can lessen that attack surface, the people who are trying to get access into our information systems. And believe you me, they are attempting, as the FBI CJIS division and all FBI continues to harden their infrastructure, their information systems. These nation state threat actors are hitting the next path of least resistance, and that is our state and local access, state and local information systems that have access into our into the FBI CJIS division. So it is occurring. I get notified of it about once a week. There's some sort of attack. Ransomware, big thing. Don't click. I'll stand on my security soapbox for a second. If you get an email from someone you don't recognize and it's, you're not expecting a UPS package or anything like, don't click. It's just, it sets up a command and control channel between your box and the attacker's box, and it just starts. It just starts the encryption of your system. And if you do succumb to a ransomware attack, don't pay the ransom. That is what was told to me from FBI personnel. Don't pay the ransom. Contact your local FBI office. There's a good chance that they may have the encryption keys that would allow you to decrypt that attack. Another way to prevent ransomware attacks is to maintain incremental and full backups of your system. You get hit with a ransomware attack. Who cares? We'll just rebuild from yesterday's backup. So there are ways to fight against these things. So I want to give you a roadmap of where we are and where we're headed. If you'll allow me, I want to go back to this slide here. These were actually published. These items listed on this screen were actually published in version 5.9.2 of the CJIS Security Policy. It is available on the website. We will, as Maria said earlier, we will be having webinars focused solely on these. But I did want to tell you that 5.9.2 is out and it does have these requirements within. So now back to the roadmap. As I said in December of 21, we briefed the media protection to the APB. they made the recommendation that the director approved it. In 2022, we did publish version 5.9.1. We tried to do that in the spring. It was a lot. It was a lot to overcome. But we did get it published in October October 1st, I think it was, of 2022. And then, as I said earlier, we briefed identification, authentication, system and services, and then system and services acquisition and AT. I'm saying that wrong. That should be SI. That should be System and Information Integrity under 2022. In the fall, we published version 5.9.2, which does have access control, maintenance, and incident response within that as well. That is what we briefed. That is what we briefed in the fall of this year. It is anticipated in the spring that we'll publish version 5.9.3, which will have everything in the columns 2021 and 2022. We're also, the CJIS APB did make the recommendation last week that we finish the modernization within 23. It was my plan to give bits at a time, three at a time, 3 security control families at a time. The community spoke and we listened, and they said, look, just give it all to us. We're going to have to look at resources. We're going to have to look at how to implement. Just give it all to us. So in the spring, we're going to be briefing audit and accountability, contingency planning, physical and environmental planning, risk assessment, and then system communications in the spring. And in the fall, configuration management, personnel security, supply chain risk management, certification and authentication, certification and accreditation, and then system and services acquisition. With the hopes of publishing version 6.0 in the spring, I would probably say it'll be closer to summer of 2024. But then we'll have a completely modernized CJIS security policy that aligns with NIST 853, that is tailored by the APB, that is tailored to meet the threats from around the world, and for the protection of our criminal justice information. So I want to leave you with this slide here. This is contact information for the FBI CJIS ISO. As you can see myself up there, I do have a deputy, Jeff Campbell. He's the FBI CJIS deputy ISO. Also, Holden Cross serves as my senior technical analyst. When it gets in the weeds, that's when I toss it over to Holden, and he gets down and he dumbs it down for me. So, but the best way, the absolute best way to reach any of us is at the bottom there with ISO@fbi.gov. So that's a long conversation. I hope I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Hopefully I have some questions that we can answer. Maria, Charlie, I'm sorry I was so long-winded. It's a lot of information. So with that, I'll stop talking for a little bit and allow you guys to take back over.
First of all, Chris, it was a lot of information that was extremely valuable, so we thank you. For those that this was new to, it was comprehensive. For those that this is familiar to, I'm sure that it addressed a lot of their needs and priorities. I will tell you that with the questions that are starting to collect in the Q&A box, we will likely not be able to respond to them all. So before we even start reviewing them, know that what we'll probably do is provide a list on our website of the questions and the provided responses. So just keep checking within the next couple of days, and certainly no more than a week, we'll have an updated list and responses to those questions so that they're for the entire group's benefit. To that end, however, I'm going to recruit Alex to start calling on a couple of the raised hands and allow them on stage to ask some questions directly. And then Chris, first of all, unfortunately, a lot of them are more technical or more precise in the responses. So we're going to have to bother you to be the point on the responses, or then check out some of the list themselves, because there's at least 16 or 20 questions already on the Q&A box. Alex?
It'll be my pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Hey, Maria. I think we only have one raised hand right now.
Okay.
Tanya is in the audience. I believe she may have a question. If not, that's the only one, and I think we can go through some of the questions queued up down below.
Cool. Tanya, you with us?
And it looks like she may have lowered her hand, so I think we're okay to proceed.
All righty then. All right, so we'll start pulling a couple of these questions from the chat room. First of all, the question that keeps coming back is, what song are you going to play for the audience? We've
Yeah,
got that 2 or 3 times. I'm guessing that you must know who's asking that question, or they will follow up with you later, but that question has been posed many times.
Very good. Yeah, I will follow up with them later. I don't know who's asking it, but they can reach out to me individually.
It's anonymous. I don't know if what that means, but they're not planning to share at the moment. We have a Megan and many others, to be fair, that's asking if these slides will be available. And Chris, I'm going to defer to you on that. If that's something that we share, again, we'll post it on the IJIS website, but.
Yeah, absolutely. I can distribute those to Alex. Everything I've talked about today is in the unclassified arena. So absolutely, I can share that information.
Excellent. I'm sure that many people that posted that question will be appreciative. And I'm just going to go down the list. Can a contract just reference the addendum instead of the appending addendum to a contract?
No, it actually needs to append the addendum. That is, the security addendum is actually set forward by the United States Attorney General. It must be attached to the contract, and each person who has unescorted access, unencrypted criminal justice information must certify that they have read the addendum, that they're going to stay in compliance with the CJIS security policy.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I just lost one of them. How can we verify or validate if cloud providers have unescorted access and/or background checks for their personnel? This is a little slightly to the left, but obviously a critical issue that's being discussed in many groups.
That's right. So if you recall back in the briefing, I talked about the different types of cloud service provisions: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. It is up to the agency to know what cloud service they are actually procuring. If you have infrastructure as a service, again, the cloud is going to give you, the cloud service provider is going to give you a playground, and you are going to control that environment. It is yours. You control the encryption keys. Lose the encryption keys, the data is gone. In that case, and G3 will speak about this as well, in that case, cloud service providers would not need a background check. As you continue to climb, platform as a service, software as a service, highly likely that your solution provider is going to have unescorted access to unencrypted CJI. If you have a software as a service provider, such as a CAD RMS vendor, make sure they are controlling the encryption keys, thereby eliminating the cloud service personnel, the Microsofts, the Amazons, the Googles, pick a cloud service provider, that they would not have that unescorted access to unencrypted CGI. If it does come down to that your cloud service provider does have unescorted access to unencrypted criminal justice information, the fact that they've had a previous background check does not matter, because that previous background check was a point in time, and your CJIS systems agency within your state will need to conduct those background checks to get a fresh look at the criminal history associated with those personnel. Excellent.
Thank you. Every time I go back, there's another one being added. Will an officer inside a cruiser need to use multi-authentication to run a check on someone that has been stopped?
Yes. Short answer is yes.
Okay.
Now, to that point, there are 9 different types of authenticators within the policy, and some of them are very easy to operate. So even an officer within a criminal justice conveyance could do it expeditiously. Yeah, there are methods that allow it to happen very efficiently.
Okay. This one's on the longer side. Our agency is trying to determine the best way to share CJIS documents with deputies at different building locations. Fax machines often fail and create an obstacle. If we save those documents on a network drive that requires security access from authorized employees, is that an acceptable method? Specifically, we are talking about sharing copies of warrants.
So I'm assuming that everyone that would have access to the shared drive, you will control access to the shared drive. Let me say it that way. They would have to, the identity would have to identify themselves, authenticate themselves by using multi-factor authentication. Absolutely, if you're controlling access into that shared drive, then absolutely you can share the information that way. Yep.
Cool. Just want to clarify. There we go. Every time that I start to read, something moves. Will the definition for advanced authentication be updated in alignment with the OMB Zero Trust Policy in regards to MFA? What is the difference between AA and MFA and the new CJIS Security Policy?
Yeah, so that great question. Advanced authentication is an antiquated term, and it was something that was established actually with law enforcement online, LEO, where we had a factor advanced authentication. It wasn't true multi-factor authentication. It was like factor and a half. So advanced authentication, it will be ousted. It is no longer within the CJIS security policy, and multi-factor authentication is the terminology and the technology that is used.
Okay, just to clarify, will currently valid security awareness training be grandfathered in, i.e. will the annual requirements start only after a user's current biennial training expires if it is still current?
The awareness and training is currently slated to be auditable and sanctionable in October of 23. So as long as the and that's by the CJIS audit unit. So as long as the CJIS, as long as the user's security awareness training certification date is within a year of that, they should be fine.
Okay, more timeline questions. What is the timeline for agencies to implement identity proofing for CJIS users?
Yes. IA identification authentication, the APB is requested that it be auditable and sanctionable in October of 2024. Caveat, let me caveat this. With the APB's recommendation that we complete the CJIS security policy modernization by December of next year, December of 2023, I anticipate heavy debate on implementation across the policy. So there may be some changes to those auditable and sanctionable dates, but currently for identity proofing, it will become auditable and sanctionable in October by the FBI CJIS audit unit in October of 2024.
Excellent. Is there a deadline for agencies implementing MFA?
The same, October of 2024. Yep.
Okay.
I wouldn't wait until October 24 to start that, because it is a change. But as I said before, statistics show if you have multi-factor authentication and you're patching your system, you cut down your likelihood of being infiltrated significantly.
Okay, this may be a little left to your focus, but what can local agencies expect from federal grants to assist in implementing these tech uplifts?
We are working with the Bureau of Justice of Assistance. We are working with the several grant agencies that we are working with, starting to have conversations with, and I want to say we're being kind of creative in a couple of grant areas, but from what I'm understanding, now please don't quote me, don't hold me to this. Chris Weatherly said no, don't do that. But I do believe that funding will be available.
Okay.
Through a grant process, through a grant application. Let me say it that way.
Okay, and note too that type of information will promulgate within the IJIS website as well, and we'll sort of tag it on two sides, just information to share and then related to CJIS security policies. We'll ensure to keep these things updated as we learn about it as well.
Perfect.
Can CJIS and non-CJIS data go across the same network infrastructure as long as it is separated by VLANs and ACLs?
That's absolutely, it can. Logical separation will suffice for separation, but yes.
Okay, is ARSO training appropriate for a vendor representative?
Not certain on the question. Is ARSO, can you repeat it, please?
Is that a value? I guess is it valuable to a service provider to take that course, or is it not really directed to that individual audience? And I'm just interpreting it that same line though.
So,
Yes.
and also is an authorized recipient on the non-criminal justice side. That is the security officer, authorized recipient security officer. They will have specialized training under the security awareness training that they'll have to be taking every year as well. Is it advantageous to what was it again? I'm sorry, Maria.
To service providers, so to vendors.
If they are associated with an authorized recipient, then absolutely it would be advantageous to them and also required.
Okay, they asked where they can find the CJIS policy 592, so I'm assuming this is all available on the CJIS website.
Correct. User browser, not the CJIS website. It's actually on le.fbi.gov. And for my non-crims, I didn't have anything to do with that. But if you use a browser of choice and search CJIS Security Policy version 5.9.2, it is publicly available.
Okay. When will this policy update be part of the audits?
Differing implementation and audit and sanctionability dates. Media protection will be auditable and sanctionable in, well, the 3 new requirements will be auditable and sanctionable in October of 2023. The existing requirements are auditable and sanctionable now. There is awareness and training, also October of 2023. System and information integrity, October of 2023. And then identification and authentication, October of 2024. Again, I caveat that by saying APB recommended we complete the CJIS Security Policy modernization in 23. I anticipate heavy debate on the implementation guidelines, and that will definitely play into when the items become auditable and sanctionable by the FBI CJIS unit, CJIS audit unit.
I'll just give you a couple more, Chris, because I'm amazed at the font of information that keeps coming, but it's all good. With I not being part of the roadmap after 22, will password rotations remain a requirement for the foreseeable future?
Password rotation. So the way the policy is written now, that if a user chooses a password, it is not it doesn't have to be a cryptic password for, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, special characters, blood type, your firstborn. It no longer has to have those composition rules. It can be a password that the user knows, that the user chooses. The password will have to be checked against a list of known breached passwords. And there are several websites out there that allow that to happen. If it's found on that website, then the user would have to choose another one. The way Maria and I could actually have the same password, but the system is going to have to choose a 32-bit a 32-bit string to add to the end of our passwords. Therefore, we maintain that uniqueness between our passwords. The password will never expire unless it is unless it shows up on that breach list. So password rotation will no longer be required.
Cool. Does the background check have to be fingerprint based?
Yes, absolutely. We do fingerprint based to make sure to validate the identity, to make sure that we are in fact dealing with Chris Weatherly. There may be multiple Chris Weatherlys around the world, but only this Chris Weatherly has these 10 prints.
Okay, I'm not sure about this one. Does a list of the existing CJIS system agencies exist, and can it be disseminated?
I don't know if it does or not. Definitely have that. Whoever asked that question can reach out to me, and I can definitely put you in touch with the CJIS Systems Agency within your area of responsibility. Usually, it's the one of the lead law enforcement agencies within the state, like in West Virginia, so West Virginia State Police, Virginia State Police, the Highway Patrol, state police agencies. But if that person will reach out to me at iso@fbi.gov, we can definitely put them in touch with those people.
Okay, there's a couple of questions related to certification. Is there any sort of cloud vendor certification so that we know a vendor is compliant without having to delve into all their personnel policies and procedures? If not, how can we ensure a vendor is compliant, as delving into each vendor's personnel policy procedures would be prohibitive and for each bid and contract? And I might tag on to your response, so go for it.
Yeah, there is no such thing as a CJIS certification. There are things such as FedRAMP and StateRAMP, something like that. And those are a good start. Now, the reason I say they're a good start is because a FedRAMP or a StateRAMP certification is going to say this product can do this. But as you remember in my slides, I said we have APB tailoring to these security requirements. So even though a a vendor may have a state ramp or a FedRAMP certification, you still need to be able to say it meets the CJIS security policy because of that tailoring that has been done by the APB. Also, a FedRAMP or a state ramp may not have personnel security requirements as well. So.
Okay, there is a question about has 5.9.2 been posted on the IJIS website? And we will, in response to that, we will work with Chris and the CJIS folks. If they are comfortable with that, certainly we will post that on our site, or at least provide you the link so that you could easily get to theirs, however that's most useful or informative.
There you go.
I'll just give you one more question. I did 5.9.2, however, Google still finds the older copies. I went to LE, FBI, Gov, and followed the links to get to it. Okay.
Great.
Last one. Thank you for this information. Grateful for the update. Next time we do expect some music from Chris. That we did get an identification on that one. That's from Patricia Scarcy, City of Eugene. So there were several others that were anonymous. So at least she was bold enough to put herself out there. But I do thank you, Chris. And Alex, I'll ask, anybody else's hand up?
Nope, I think we're good.
All righty. I'm going to give the opportunity for Chris or for Charlie. Any last thoughts or messages you'd like to deliver to our audience?
From my point of view, thank you again for having me. I think with this modernization, it is a big change. As I said, technology has outpaced the CJIS security policy. We're playing a catch-up game. Our adversaries are not waiting. So I appreciate the opportunity and the forum to speak about these changes, and stay tuned. There are more changes coming. So thank you very much for this.
Absolutely. Charlie?
I just would like to reiterate, I'm grateful for Chris and his participation today. I think it was great. I think that there's been a lot of positive comments in the questions and answers in the chat. And keep those questions coming. We're going to compile those, and we'll either answer them directly, or we will fold them into our next presentation and series of educational and informational outreach that we do. So stay tuned. This is the first but not the last of these informational opportunities for you. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And I thank both of you, gentlemen. You are the ones that made a difference in making this happen. I can tell you that it's these types of partnerships that we have with you personally, and frankly with FBI CJIS, that has grown of late, and we are so appreciative of. The IJIS community, consisting of all of us, can't succeed without the partnership, and I think that there is great value not only to these type of dialogues and forums, but to the attendees that even in this virtual setting, still get a lot of information and understand where there's additional sources of information that will make their operational day-to-day lives easier and more fluid. So I thank you for all of that. And I encourage everyone attending or to either pass the word on this event, on the information that's available at the IJIS website, on future events that then we have within that slide deck that we'll post as well, just so that you know that these are things that will continue to be available to you. And as Charlie mentioned, let us know if this was a value or how we could improve this, because we can only improve it if we know where there needs to be some refining or some polishing. So we encourage your participation and your engagement, and you're joining the community with all the definitions that represents. So thank you all for joining us, and have a great day and wonderful holiday season. Thanks, folks.